Hello and welcome to the Choralosophy Podcast. This is episode 208. Choir is not my family. Do I still belong? With Dr. Jason Dungee. Often in choral instruction, we utilize the word family to describe the cohesiveness of our ensembles. But what about the students who don't view choir as their family? Can we be okay with the idea that singers come to us for many different reasons? But what happens when students don't want to be in the family? What if you have students that truly just want to treat it like a class? Or what if they are super talented, but they're introverted? What about a choral director whose main reason for doing the job is the love of music? Gasps and clutches pearls. We can over-personalize this rejection. Jason Dungee joins me to add some nuance to what is often a very misunderstood and oversimplified concept in education more broadly, and of course in choral music. If we are honest, aren't we a bit offended when a singer doesn't love singing for us? Don't we take it a little personally? What if you have students that are really talented, but you don't like them? Sometimes we unintentionally marginalize or isolate the students who have rejected us. For many choir directors, our definition of success includes making our kids feel what we felt when we were in choir. I also ran some of my own ideas about belonging that have appeared on the show by Jason, and those are linked in the show notes to those past episodes. So tune in and have your thinking stimulated and challenged, as always, and then weigh in yourself with your related ideas and experiences over on Facebook in the Choralosophers group or on Substack at choralosophy.substack.com. Calling all concert planners. Let's talk about Ludus. It's more than just a ticketing platform. It's a game changer for event management. Picture this: simplified ticketing, seamless marketing, powerful fundraising, and now, brand new this year, volunteer management. All for free to you and your organization. Thousands of organizations trust Ludus, and you should too. Elevate your events with Ludus. Sign up at ludus.com/choralosophy today and experience the difference. Don't forget to use the Choralosophy checkout code at all of the affiliates for the Choralosophy podcast. Those are sitereadingfactory.com whenever you renew your membership for you and your students. New, coming up, you're going to hear more about this later in July, but 3 Minute Theory is now an affiliate, and you can save 15% by entering Choralosophy when you sign up at 3minutetheory.com. The content on the Choralosophy podcast is free. One of the ways that I make that happen is by asking for your help. If you can support the show on Patreon or on Substack, I appreciate it, and it really does make this whole thing work. Quick shout out to everyone on the Patreon at the producer level or higher: Brian Long, Venture Studios, Jonah Clixbull, Angie Schilling, David Kowalczyk, Kyle Peterson, Max Jackson, Michael Herron, Ryan Main, Stephen Kathy Kakachik. Okay, everybody, I'm here with Dr. Jason Dungee, and we're going to be talking about one of my favorite things to talk about related to choral music instruction, building of choirs, building of groups, and that is basically drilling in on the idea of whether or not, as we try to build these inclusive family environments in choir, whether or not everyone who comes to our choirs have the same needs as it relates to this. And I got a hot tip on Dr. Dungee's presentation on this from Marcus Garrett when he was here in Kansas City last week, and he said, you've got to talk to Jason about this, because I've done several conversations about this related topic, and people really tend to get a lot out of it. So Jason, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Chris. Thank you for being here. Thank you for asking me to come, and thanks to Marcus for the connect.
Yeah. So tell us a little bit about you first. Where do you do what you do, and how did you get into it?
Well, the short truncated version is I'm currently the director of choral activities at UNC Charlotte, University of North Carolina at Charlotte. Prior to here, I served as in the same position at Claflin University, HBCU in South Carolina. Prior to that, I was in an interim position at USF, University of South Florida. And that quick bio thing where got my undergrad from Hampton University, another HBCU. For anybody who's listening, the best HBCU. Let's put that out there. Then I went and got my master's at Westminster Choir College. Taught high school in Virginia for about 10 years, where a lot of this idea kind of looking to the future, got some of its research done, if you will. This germinated kind of while I was teaching high school in Newport News, Virginia, and Williamsburg, Virginia. Then I went out to Arizona, got my doctorate, and then started my collegiate teaching career. So, in terms of my experience as a learner, I kind of accomplished kind of the trifecta for me, which was an HBCU undergrad, conservatory, master's, and then a research one doctorate, which kind of has given me a really wide range of experiences that I've utilized to kind of form a lot of philosophies about choral education.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so you've got this presentation. You shared with me some notes that I have in front of me, and I think I just want to start with your title because it's compelling, which is that choir, and I'm paraphrasing here, but choir is not my family. I don't feel like choir is my family, but do I still belong there? And that's kind of the question you ask in the title of your presentation. What got you to that specific kind of realization that there's tension there between what we always hear and we hear preached, for lack of a better term, that we need to make our choirs a family environment that where everyone feels bought in and welcome and all of those things, which are good. But then there's tension between what happens when a kid or an adult even comes and shows up and says, well, I like choir, but it's not my main thing, and I'm here for the notes and rhythms, and then I'm going to go to baseball practice or whatever. So talk to us about where this idea came from your perspective.
Yeah, well, I remember I think maybe 2 years ago, 2 or 3 years ago, there was a student that I had who was incredibly talented. I mean, this kid could sing. He was just an incredibly talented singer, but his personality, he was incredibly introverted. And he was one of those students who, as soon as the bell rang, as it were, he's making a beeline out of there. He's not hanging around for like the community stuff or
Mm-hmm.
like the hanging out stuff afterward. And so I kind of was thinking about him and his experience. And then I had another student who he said to me outright, he said, listen, he was what we call a non-traditional student here. He was in the military for a while and then came to college as an undergrad. And so he's a little bit older. And he told me, he said, listen, I enjoy choir, but I'm not really here for all of the stuff. He was like, I just want to come in. I enjoy singing, and if it's going to be a whole lot of, you know, holding hands and kumbaya and all that kind of stuff, he's like, I'm not really here for that. I just enjoy singing.
Mm-hmm.
And I said, that's really interesting because he should be able to still just enjoy. There still has to be room for that kind of perspective, especially nowadays in this kind of post COVID world we're
Mm-hmm.
in, where
Mm-hmm.
young people are much more empowered to kind of speak their truth about how they feel about things and a lot of them do a lot more thinking about how they feel. We have to kind of make room for where these students who may not have a perspective that is typical, like where do they fit in? That's kind of where that came from, and the whole thinking behind it was, you know what, you don't have to do all that. And I said something to him that ended up becoming our mantra. I was like, just come in and do your job. Just your job as a chorister, as somebody in the choir, is to know your music, come in, participate to the fullest, be reliable in that regard. And then that's it. That's your job. That is at the baseline what you need to do. We need to be able to rely on you to be present and to know your music.
Yeah.
And for him, that was like, okay, great. Now, fast forward, he's all in for the stuff. He has ended up being all in and like, all about these sectionals and all about like he has friends in there now. But his initial perspective was, I don't want to do all that. I just
Yeah.
want to come out and sing. And so that's kind of what made me really focus in on, well, how do we create an environment where that, even if they don't evolve, where it's just very clear how they can be a valued participant in this process without having to serve in this family capacity that we kind of put on sometimes. I think family is a
Yeah.
trickery sometimes.
Yeah, and
So
I'm glad you brought up perspective of coming from teaching high school first, where you started to kind of notice some of these things. And of course, as a high school teacher myself for over 20 years, this is something that has been on my mind for quite a long time. I can think of one story I'll share with you and for the audience too that was really eye-opening in this capacity. I had a student, actually the third student in a year in my high school choir. This was a couple years ago now. Passed away. We
Mm,
had a really rough stretch of choir kids passing away
wow.
in after the pandemic, and some suicides, and some, just it was a very rough time. And my advanced SATB group is about 100 kids. And when the third one of these hit us, we had these kind of family meetings where you have to come in, like, when something like this happens, you can't come back into the choir rehearsal and just act like things are normal,
Right.
and just, okay, we got a concert next week, we got to hit the notes and rhythms. You have to address it.
Yeah.
And what but here's what I did. I got up in front of the kids because we'd had several of these conversations,
Hmm.
these family meetings, and I stood in front of them and I said, guys, I don't know what the right way to handle today is, because I know that there are some of you who you need to process this with me leading it and with this group of people, and we need to talk. We need to have this family conversation. But I also know that there are some of you who really just need to sing right now. And with 100 kids in the room, I don't know what the right answer is for everyone.
Right.
And I said, so as the leader of the group, I don't know how to structure this next hour. Honestly, I don't know how much stuff we should do. And by
Hmm.
simply doing that, by leading into it, the kids then opened up with the kids who did feel like, hey, you know what, Mr. Muntz, I don't want to have another one of these we just lost a team member conversations. I just want to
Yeah.
sing. Like that's what I need right now. And that kid who didn't feel like they needed that from us at that moment felt empowered to say that. And then other kids felt empowered to say what they needed, and it was a brief thing. And so then what we came up with, it was great, actually. It ended up being an extremely impactful hour where we came up with, as a group, we will have some group conversation time where people can talk about our student that we lost and memories about him,
Hmm.
but we will preserve time also to sing during the rehearsal, so that people can just be together and make music together, because for some people, it is the music that is why they're there.
Yeah.
It's they have to do the music together, and for some kids, and people, it's about the people. And I think, like you said, there is room for both.
Yeah.
Is that kind of where you're coming from too, just as a concept?
Yeah, because I think conceptually a lot of times, I think being a choral musician is so interesting because for so many of us, it's one of the rare areas where we were in the seat of the singer when we were kids for a lot of us, and then we become like the person in the front, and what ends up happening is we take a lot of what we experience as a singer and we try to recreate that
There you go.
for our students.
Uh
And
huh.
it's like, well, you're now trying to take your experience and overlay that as a group experience. And that can be dangerous, right? Because the way you perceived your role in choir, the way you engage with choir may not be the way that fits the group. And so for a lot of us, if we're being honest, choir is a it's kind of about how we feel about choir.
Mm-hmm.
We kind of like
Yep.
we do it in a way that makes us feel.
It's a bias.
Yeah, yeah,
Mm-hmm.
yeah. And so I remember just a brief little thing. I remember when I was an undergrad at Hampton, the if anybody knows the choir at HBCUs, it's a different animal, if you will, because for so many HBCUs, the choir was built with the university. So the school was actually built on the back of the choir. Like for Hampton, for instance, the Hampton singers actually went around and sang to raise money to build buildings on campus.
Yeah. Yep.
So choir is now integrated into the actual history of the school. For a lot of universities, choir is a part of a curriculum that is added on as the university expands, right? So,
Yeah.
oh, now we have a music degree. So we're going to add, right? So it becomes something like that. Well, with that, it ends up being um, a whole kind of unique experience for people who are in choir and at HBCUs. And for me, it just occupies so much of your life, right? Like I didn't have a spring break all through undergrad because spring break was choir tour time.
Right.
And in the one year, my fifth year, where we didn't have choir tour because I wasn't in the choir anymore, I didn't know what to do. I was like, what do y'all do? What do the civilians do? Oh, like during spring break? Because I'm usually in Atlanta or I'm in, Ohio by now. So anyway, um, I remember reflecting on that time and thinking to myself, man, I'll never experience this again. You hear that all the time. Like you'll never experience this is a time in your life, value it because you'll never experience it again. Well, fast forward 20 years or so, I'm now teaching at another HBCU and I'm the choir director. And now I'm going on tour and I'm doing all the things. And I remember thinking to myself, this seems so unfair because I'm enjoying this experience all over again.
Mm-hmm.
Right. Like I'm enjoying choir all over again the way I did when I was an undergrad, being able to go on tour, being able to do all these concerts. And so I'm really kind of thinking about like how much I'm enjoying the experience of doing all these things.
Yeah.
I mean, I really had to remember, like, well, remember it's a different time though. Right. There are I have to like get myself out of my own enjoyment and remember that for some of these students, um, they don't look at choir the same way I looked at choir back then. And so for them, it could really be a different thing. And so I had to kind of remember that I'm not just transposing my experience onto them, but I have to like kind of be in the moment where we are and remember that they're the students. This is actually for them and not for me to kind of like relive the joys of my collegiate choir experience, if that all makes sense.
Yeah, no, it totally
So,
does. I think you're onto something really important here, which is that I think here's how I think of it. What are the chances that those of us who are currently choir directors for a living experienced choir in that more holistic family way as kids, which is why we then grew up to want to do it for a living? We probably, and I don't want to speak for everyone, we probably felt that family connection and we
mhm,
loved the music.
right,
We had both,
right,
and I think then it's very difficult for us to see any experience that's less than that for any of our students as a failure of our own. Like
right.
that we failed to show them how magical choir was if they don't buy into every aspect of it, and this has gotten me into a little trouble over the years where I actually believe that that's an ego problem, and I've said that publicly, but it's not an attack on anyone. It's just when we, I think just the definition of an ego problem is if I project my needs onto you, then I'm
Mhm,
assuming that you are like me, and
right,
and
right.
that I'm the main character in the story, and you are an extra.
Yeah, yeah,
And I
yeah,
think I think we treat sometimes we can treat our students and our singers that way unintentionally simply by trying to micromanage what they feel and what they experience when they come into our
right.
choir classes. Thoughts?
Well, it's funny because I actually mentioned that because I think we're all accustomed to being our student's favorite teacher,
Yeah. Or we
right?
fail.
Yeah, yeah,
Hmm.
because the class itself kind of engenders that. The class itself, it's most of the time it's an elective, and even if it's a student who, particularly if they're in our advanced groups, like the kids who maybe had to audition into those groups or
Yep.
the kids who've been with us for like, oh, we're absolutely their favorite. I'm absolutely there. This is their favorite class. I'm their favorite teacher. But then, if we were to find out that we were not, like if we were to find out that Mr. Johnson who teaches math is actually their favorite teacher, I think a lot of us, if we were perhaps being honest, would almost be offended by that.
Yeah.
What do you mean? Like, as this is the way that we have a connection. Like, this is music. This is like what we do as part of who we are, and all these different things. These kind of platitudes. And I think if we're being honest, sometimes if a student comes in the room who does not buy in, I made a little quip talking about how different levels of teacher will handle that rejection a little bit differently. I think I was saying something along the lines of like a teacher's been around for a while. If they find out a student doesn't like them, a senior teacher is probably more like,
Yeah.
oh,
Right. Oh
that's
well.
fine. Right, right. Like my mother-in-law, former mother-in-law, I say former because she's passed. I don't know how you say that. Um,
Makes
my mother,
sense. Yeah. Yeah.
yeah. She said to one time, she was like, "That's okay. I've been ignored by much better people than you." Like it's kind of like that's kind of how the approach of a senior teacher. It's like
Yeah.
that's fine. And then maybe the veteran teacher, a more experienced teacher may actually rally other students, like kind of in those, because we all have those students that are kind of part of our inner circle, if you will. And you kind of ask them, like, are people saying blah, blah, blah? You kind of get confirmation about whether or not what that student is saying about you is true. Do
Hmm.
more students feel that way? Do you know what I mean? You start almost wanting to get information to find out if that's true. And then I made the joke that a new teacher ends up on like the I am a choir director Facebook page, and it's like an anonymous post like help me, you know what I mean?
Right.
It's like they're freaking out because they found out students don't like them.
Yeah.
um and it's just just a joking way of just kind of I guess delineating that, but the bottom line of it is really that we feel that much more personally. Sometimes we can feel that much more personally than some of the STEM area teachers may feel, because their area of work almost requires them to be disassociated in a way. It's,
Yeah. I'm glad.
math
Yeah.
is who they are.
I'm glad you, yeah, I agree. I'm glad you brought up the STEM teachers as like our colleagues in our buildings and in our universities and high schools and stuff that
Yeah.
teach in other subject matters. Earlier, I said, what percentage of us who are currently choir teachers experienced this whole smorgasbord of feelings when we went to choir? I I've talked to some teachers in my building over the years from other subject matters where I would ask them questions like, so are you a math teacher because when you were in math in high school, you felt like you had a really strong emotional connection to your teacher and to the group of kids that were in your math class, and that's why you became a math teacher? And they'll laugh almost every single time. Like,
Yeah.
and it's almost like they don't understand the question. Like, no, why would
Yeah.
I?
Why would
Like,
I?
why? How would I? And I said, well, for most of us choir teachers and band teachers, probably, and orchestra teachers and stuff, that's why we became that kind of teacher. And it's a foreign concept because for that stereotypical math teacher, it's because they love math and they
Right.
love the way numbers work and they love crunching and solving problems, and they want to show kids the joy of how to do that. And they have beliefs, if you keep talking to them longer, you'll learn that they have beliefs about how important that neurodevelopment is for kids to learn how numbers work in their heads, and like they feel
Mhm.
passionate about that. And I actually feel like in vocal music in particular, right now in our current culture, there is
Mhm.
almost no room for that. In other words, there is no room for that music teacher who says, "You know what? I am here because I just want to teach kids music. Like I want to teach kids to do music well, and that's why I'm here." Because now we have like it, and this is kind of why I think this concept is so interesting, is that we are constantly being told as choir directors that the sense of belonging that we foster in our choir room is the goal. Like that is
Right.
the goal. And if you're not good at that,
Right.
then you suck at this job. And I think that actually can cause a whole lot of choir teachers beating themselves up. And so I'm
Mhm.
curious, two things. One, what do you think about that? And second thing is, have you, when you present this information and when you talk about this stuff, have you ever gotten any pushback along those lines about this?
So, um, first of all, I think that that's absolutely correct. I think that there is this pressure almost to be this amusical being,
Mm-hmm.
right? Who is able to bring in, uh, to be this extrovert, to have all of these qualities of personality that actually make you a better choir teacher, right? Like the ability to empathize, the ability to really be a counselor, to be somebody who can, you know, talk to personal problems, who's willing to open up yourself to like all these different kind of like qualities that you don't develop in a practice room, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And if you don't have that, then you're actually not good at the job, right? And there's this, we don't overtly say that, but it's kind of like you said, it's kind of implied. There's a feeling that comes along with it. Um, and I think that's damaging not just for students, but it's damaging for, you know, us as professionals.
Mm-hmm.
You almost
Mm-hmm.
can't be just a really good musician who's good at understanding vocal technique, who's good at understanding repertoire, who has a vast knowledge of, latest trends in pedagogy. That can't be it. You also have to be a person who is able to deal with all these other issues, right? That have nothing to do, perhaps,
Right.
with music. And that can be daunting for somebody who just wants to do choir stuff, right?
Yeah, I would say,
Um,
sorry, I'm going to jump in
oh,
because
go ahead.
I think it's actually worse than that. I think it's not that people feel it's that it's daunting that they have to be both. I actually think our culture right now, and when I say our, I mean choir directors, that we have almost gotten to a point, an inflection point where we don't even care about whether or not somebody is a top notch pedagogue, excellent musician, their choirs sound fire. Those types of things are actually less important to us than whether or not they say the right things about making people feel like they belong at conventions or on their social media or whatever. It's gotten to a point where I don't see it as a balance anymore. I see it as just for example, I can remember. I'm old enough to remember a time when we thought of who the elite choir directors were in our profession based on what their choir sounds like. That's how you would get to that status. And it isn't that way anymore. And I don't think that's 100% bad. But I'm a balance guy, and I don't see it as very well balanced thoughts. Are you a director new to the profession? Or are you a seasoned director who is in a new place? One of my favorite tips for generating interest in the program and to instill buy-in is to plan a trip. There are so many options. You can go to Orlando, you can go to Ireland, or you can perform in a parade or a theme park. You can even take the stage at Carnegie Hall in New York. Wherever you end up, not only will your current crew look forward to the trip, but younger students will count the days until it's their turn to go. If you have no idea where to start, connect with Kaleidoscope Adventures at mykatrip.com.
Yeah, I think that there is I think there's a lot of validity to that because balance is important. Because I'm old enough to remember when almost it was almost abusive by some of these
Uh-huh.
guru conductors, right?
Yes.
Like it was almost like when you look back on it, like the things that they would say and do in order to facilitate the sound that they were looking for was, I mean, verbal abuse, emotional abuse. I've seen people getting kicked out of choirs just for, you know, like, and I'm not talking about like kicked out of the day. I mean the entire choir
Oh yeah.
because they something trivial happened. Or I've had choir directors where they're yelling all the time and they're banging on the piano and but then when you listen to their choir on stage, it's like impeccable. And you're like, oh my gosh, this is the best choir I've ever heard. But those people are singing in absolute fear
Yep.
of making a mistake. So I think the pendulum, if you will, should find itself somewhere in the middle where we're not just glorifying a group or glorifying just the a group that actually objectively doesn't maybe sing that well, or glorifying a conductor who objectively may not have good pedagogy, may say things in terms of what they are trying to teach that actually is not sound in
Mm-hmm.
terms of like, "Oh, that's actually not a good advice. That's actually not how you deal with that vowel, but you're doing a good job of making people feel good. So we have to like, I think there's a danger of
Yeah.
that, of us lowering kind of the bar of excellence, if you will, that we've kind of been accustomed to, all for the sake of things that aren't necessarily directly related to music making.
Yeah.
I think there's a
Yep.
place in the middle that you're talking about where you can have really sound pedagogy, but then the environment is healthy
Yeah.
also.
Yep.
Um,
And that should be the goal. And I think the response to that past era, I guess you could say, that you were describing, of the tyrannical conductor, um, the, I think you could make the argument that that tyrannical conductor is getting a sound out of the choir, but with really bad pedagogy. Because if you have to yell at somebody, then you're not. That probably indicates that you didn't explain yourself well. You didn't create
yeah.
a good rehearsal environment where people can
Right.
use those skills that they have, etc. And so I think if that was the approach, then I think we would be in a much better, healthy position. But I want to go back to just whether or not when you present on these ideas, whether or not they're well
There's
received.
pushback.
Yeah. Uh-huh. Talk to us about that a little bit.
I haven't received pushback because I present this in a way. I think it's kind of hard to disagree,
Oh,
right?
sure.
I think it's not
Yep.
hard to disagree. I mean, I think, and it's not a combative topic. It's a let's challenge your thinking about
Yeah.
this topic.
Mm-hmm.
One of the things that you said that I think um, is one of the kind of like core philosophies behind this is, oftentimes I think what we do is we make our students enjoy the music through us rather than enjoying us through the music,
Mm-hmm.
right? So it's and the reason why I say that is because that thinking came specifically from my own experience when I would teach a student all 4 years of high school, and then and they're in choir all the time, great singer, blah blah blah, all this stuff, and then they go off to college, and then I would see them maybe that following summer after their first year of college. I'm like, hey, so what are you doing? And I'm like, are you still singing? They're like, no, no, I didn't do. I'm not doing choir. And it's like, why? You were a choir kid, right? Like you
Mm-hmm.
were one of my choir kids. Why are you not doing choir in college? And then uh, pairing that with me now being a college professor and um, talking to students who, um, particularly where I am now, where I started out only 4 years ago, and so I had some students that came to me who were juniors who may have been out of choir until I came, right? And then I asked them, well, how come you haven't been in choir? Well, I was in for a semester, but it wasn't the same
Yeah.
as when I was in high school. It didn't feel the same. It didn't feel the same. And to me, what that says is, oh, you didn't like the director.
Yeah.
Like
Yep.
you had a experience with choir that was really focused, it was really director centric, probably. Like you
Yep.
probably like for you, like it really was, you enjoy this teacher and you almost and for some of them, I would not all of them, but I think there's some that go as far as like I enjoy this teacher and I tolerate choir music. Right. Like
Yeah.
to
Right.
be with this teacher, I will sing in choir. Right. Like I think for some teachers are so good at creating a welcoming environment that students are there for them.
Yep.
And I think the danger that we have in that is, okay, well, why is there this big crevasse between senior year of high school and freshman year of college? Because the teacher's gone, right? The teacher is gone. And so now students are left to choose to value the music on its own merit. Like they
Mm-hmm.
choose to value their choral experience on its own merit without this magical teacher who makes them enjoy it. And I think for some of them, that's a struggle. It's like,
Yep.
well, without Mr. Johnson, there's no point to
Yeah.
this for me. And
And
I
and
think,
the and the relationships Mr. Johnson helped him form, or helped them form, with the other singers in the room, this whole family thing.
yeah, we
Mm-hmm.
were like a family. Oh, my concert choir was like a family when I was in high school. And I'm telling them, I'm like, well, we're not, you will come to find that this is not a family in that regard, but we are an amazing community.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and I based that idea kind of off of the I don't know if you saw, but I was talking about the am I maybe jumping ahead, but the
Oh, you're good.
homeowners association approach to this.
Oh, yeah. Go. Let's talk about that. Sure. What is that about?
Yeah, so I was thinking about like okay, so in a community, in a gated community, if you will, or whatever community has a homeowners association, you have several homes in that community that are all individual, that are all autonomous, they're all do their own thing, except for issues that impact the community. So Your responsibility as a homeowner is to make sure your grass is cut, make sure your hedges are trimmed, make sure your beat up Chevy isn't parked on your driveway leaking oil on blocks, right? Because these are things that negatively impact the value of the homes in the community.
Yeah.
So your responsibility as a homeowner is to make sure that you're cutting your grass, not because you want your grass cut, because that's the expectation for people in this community. Cut your grass, trim your hedges, get your beat up car off the front yard, right?
Yep.
Amongst other things. Um, in the midst of that, you may discover that your next door neighbor is a really good friend, right? You may discover that the guy across the street from you is a really awesome friend and somebody you enjoy talking to. So much so that y'all might even like have keys to each other's houses. You might raise each other's kids together, play dates all the time. You create within that community, maybe you have some people that are like family to you,
Yeah.
right? Maybe you do have somebody in that community that is so close to you that they could just walk in your house without knocking. That's great. But then there's somebody down the street who is not like that.
Right.
Just because they're in your community doesn't mean they can just walk in your house.
Yep.
Right. So your relationship with that person down the street may be completely different from the person that's your right next door neighbor or the person that's across the street from you. But you don't have to have that relationship with them to be a functioning member of the community
Yeah.
that
That's
you
a
can
really,
never meet.
I love this analogy. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, you can never meet them. You can never see them. You can never talk to them. You can never. But the reality is they still have to do their job.
Yep.
They still have to, in order to be a functioning, because, and in fact, if they don't do their job, they will stand out more. If you do come into your neighborhood and see that there's a car in front that's broken down and it's just sitting there, eventually you're going to be like, hey, how come that car is still there? What are they doing? How come their grass isn't cut? Why are there things growing up on the side of the houses? Why is that house looking run down in this neighborhood? That to me, now it becomes a problem because you're not actually doing your job, which is the baseline of being a functioning member of the community. To me, that's the same thing as, how come that person's always late? How come they're always absent? How come they never have their music with them? Things that have no respective personality. Your personality has nothing to do with or your preferences, and all these different things that we have to actually pay attention to don't should not prevent you from the baseline of, hey, learn your music.
Right.
And
Yeah.
if learning, even if learning music is hard, there are still things we put in place to help you do that. The responsibility is still the same.
Yeah.
So it's that approach where the homeowners association approach kind of allows me to make room for everybody to feel like they know what they need to do to be a valued part of your community. You know what you need to do.
Oh,
It's
that's
very
really good.
clear at the baseline what you need to do. However, if you want to do more and you want to participate in the neighborhood cookout and bring your tray of brats or whatever, you can do that. You can help, do all the things. You can do all the extra things. There's room for both in that space, and all have equal value, if it will.
Right. No, that's really good. The analogy that I used, I did an episode about this a couple of years ago, and I called it the belonging buffet, which is the idea that we create classrooms and choirs and spaces based on a similar idea where if every singer is walking through the buffet line, some of them might just want to be there, and every time they go through the line, they're choosing notes and rhythms. That is why they're there. And
Yeah.
as educators, especially as people who teach younger kids, they might not know that there's this other part of the buffet over here that has a lot for them, and it's this belonging aspect and this family aspect. And my suggestion was that we should show younger kids that that's there for them, and that part of the buffet is open anytime they want it. But
Mhm.
we shouldn't take it as an insult if they don't want it. And we should make sure that they feel like they can still walk through that buffet line as many times as they want to just get the notes and rhythms. As long
Yeah.
as we're able to balance that, and I think the reason I got in trouble for it, I got the pushback, was because I also was willing to say that I think sometimes as choir teachers, when we try to force them over to the mashed potatoes, it's because of our ego. It's because we want them to have that same experience that we had with choir, or else we feel like we fail. And I think the other issue with that is that when we don't get this balance right, what ends up happening is we have kids who are only in choir because of the family aspect, and that actually prevents them from falling in love with the music aspect in lots of different ways. And I think as a college teacher, that's kind of what you might have been describing earlier, where a person shows up to the college choir and they quit or they drop out because it's not a family like their high school choir. Well, I actually see that as a failure to create that balance at the high school level. Thoughts?
Well, no, in fact, that's exactly what that was actually part of my talk was that, I see the results of that on this end.
Mm-hmm.
When students are not um, able to make that shift, because the reality is, because I know I'm not for everyone, right? I know that not everybody's going to like the way that I do things, and I'm fine with that. But I can tell by what students say what's at the kind of core of what they're really saying. Like I can tell if it's me or if it's this experience that you had that that's making it so that I'm not the person that you got used to. In fact, some of the students that have enjoyed me the most have told me, "Oh, you remind me so much of my teacher back in back in high school." And I'm
Right.
like, "All right." And I'm fine with that. I don't find that as an insult, but I automatically know that those students are like all in right from the beginning because it's familiar.
Yeah.
But
Yep.
but of course I also have spent 10 years as a high school teacher. So a lot of my DNA as a teacher at the collegiate level comes from teaching high school. So I can
Right.
see
You've
why.
seen it from both sides.
Yeah.
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 Mm-hmm.
So and what I recognize is that, some of the things that I tell cause I have one choir of all tenors and basses, and they're all non-majors. And, very quickly, I tell them all the time, listen, choir for you in here will serve the same purpose as it did for you in high school. For a lot of you all, choir was the place where you kind of got away from the main thing that you do, and you come
Mm-hmm.
to choir, you're like, whoo, okay, let me get away from, I can do this thing, and then let me go back. And so
Yep.
that's even intensified here at the collegiate level where you're fully immersed in biology, you're fully immersed in nursing, you're fully immersed in architecture, and then being able to come to choir and exhale and sing and get that out. That actually is a really important part for the non-major, particularly at the collegiate level. And so I harp on that. I'm like, you do that. Let's get you in the room and sing.
Yeah.
Let's get you in the room and sing. But I still never. I try to always keep the music front and center. I try to always have them see me through the music rather than I just really like you, so I want to keep doing. Like I try to avoid that as best as I can. It's difficult sometimes because I'm so likable, but like, but no, but I mean, it's difficult because you know you want to, the personality and the fun and all that kind of stuff kind of ends up becoming part of it, if you will.
Mm-hmm.
But you really have to reel it in and make sure you're always focused on the music and always giving the music the time and really keeping that front and center.
Right. So, okay, so I have a story that's related to this that it might offer a unique perspective too. And so I get to see what you're describing from both sides also, but I
Mhm.
see it happening simultaneously because, of course, I teach high school for my main job, but I also direct a semi pro group that specializes in collaboration with youth singers and young collegiate age singers and
Mhm.
all these types of things. And so I get a lot of my former students who will go on to do music education majors or vocal performance majors, etc. And then I will hear from them that what you just described is like, oh, like I'm singing in my college choir, but it's just not the same. And I'll have this conversation with them where I'll point out to them like you need to stick with it because you're there for the music, etc. And I usually am able to get through to them. But then I
Mhm.
also when those students will then come to my rehearsals for the semi-pro group, that actually has caused conflict with several of my former students over the years. And here's what happens: they get used to a version of me that was teaching the high school choir, that was considering all of these family dynamics and group
Yeah.
building things and creating social environments, which we have to do as high school teachers to recruit. And, we need our numbers to go up and we need to get everybody
Mhm.
in there. And then they come see the version of me that has a 4 day time period to get music to reach a professional level where people are paying for tickets and
Yeah.
and they see that version of me, and then I will find out, usually from someone else, that that kid quit that group. They didn't want to come back and do that group anymore because they just don't like Mr. Muntz in that environment. And so I'm like, well, but it's the same me. I care about
Right.
you. I care about you in the same amount that I did when you were in high school, but
Yeah.
we're doing different stuff. We're
Yeah.
like we're here for a different reason, and I think that little experience is a microcosm of what we're describing here, where all of us are choir teachers, choir directors within a certain context, and
Mm.
and then we forget that our students are also, and our singers are also singers within different contexts. They all come
Right.
to us with different needs. Thoughts about that?
Yeah, I think that's really interesting, and I think it's a really spot on kind of example of it because I mean, when the music is not the priority for the singer, I think you end up running into a situation where the personality and and this isn't to say that personality and who the director is as a person shouldn't matter. It absolutely should because we're human beings. We're not just and honestly, so much of our art form requires us to tap in to messages about humanity, tap into our own
Mm-hmm.
humanity, and it's not cold, and it's not a cold art form
Right.
where
It
it's
can't be.
static. It can't
Mm-hmm.
be right. So it
Mm-hmm.
has to have that level of humanity in it. But I think that the trap that so many of us fall into is, and us as teachers, I mean, we feed so much on admiration that our singers give us. About we feed so much, and not even intentionally, I think for a lot of us it's just we feel so accomplished when a young person kind of opens themselves up wholly to our class and
Mm-hmm.
opens themselves up to like, oh, this, and they're almost in tears because they love this song so much or they love this, like we like you were saying before, it really feeds us, and dare say, yeah, it feeds an ego, a part of our ego that says,
Yep.
I have opened them.
Yep.
Like I've accomplished
I am the
this.
high priest, and they have,
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I am now, these are my disciples, and I am now going to baptize you in the name of, you know, Whitaker Palestrina. And, but, I mean, like, it's like, where it's like we have that kind of, and again, I think it's a subconscious thing for a lot of us because it's part of what we love.
Yeah.
We love building this family, and we love building this atmosphere where a student can come in and they're just like, oh, I feel like we're a family. I feel like so all those different things. So when I think the consequence of that is that students, they see us in a role in their lives that may not translate later on.
Yeah.
Right, like what you're talking about experiencing, like they see
Mm-hmm.
this role of they're trying to get something fed in them, that, like, in that experience you're talking about, what it sounds like to me is that young person was, the music was a side dish to the main thing, which was how it feels,
Yep.
right? And so then when you now put you in a situation where we don't got time for all the feels,
Yep.
we have a concert in 4 days. Like,
Yep.
I do not have time for, like, it's just what we got to do, and you take that away. So now the side dish is the main thing. And they're like, well, I like the other stuff.
Yep.
Where's the other stuff? And for you, you're like, well, I never made that the main thing.
Yeah.
Right. That's, for me, it's always been the main thing has been the main thing, as it were. And so I think for a lot of times, young people may struggle with that, even when they go off to be teachers.
Yep.
I think they struggle. Like I
Like
think that struggle.
especially if they go on to be teachers
Yeah,
in
because
lots
they
of
feel
ways.
like the accomplishment is trying to build this thing that they felt,
Yep.
and it's like, build the music. Build the music. That's a place where you can start, and then figure out, you know, the other stuff. But build the music. Let the music be first. And I say this especially for new teachers that are going in, and I'm like, they say I had a student ask me, well, how do I make I'm having a really hard time because the person I'm following, was very successful. Like, God forbid you follow somebody successful. It's always easier if you follow a train wreck. But if you follow somebody that's successful, it's very difficult.
I've done
But I tell
both.
them, yeah, right. And I tell them, I'm like, make them sound good.
Yep.
Like, that's just make them sound good. And you can do that. Like, you've been trained on how to do that. Like, make them sound good. And if you can do that, then that's where you can start. And then from there, you can build other things. But your priority has to be, make them sound good first.
Yep.
And then the other things will kind of happen. Because the reality is a lot of these students don't want you to be there.
Yeah. Yeah,
And
and
so,
you're right. If the make them sound good is the priority, that's our main job, and it's because, and I think people misunderstand this when they hear people say that, because then they'll immediately jump in and say, well, but no, our main job is building humans, not musicians. Like, we want to build humans, and I struggle with that because, again, the math teacher doesn't feel that way. So why are we the special person within the institutions that we teach, where we have this high priest relationship with the students, but the math teachers don't, and the history teacher's job is to make sure they know what happened 100 years ago. That is their job. And so, as music teachers, this is where people get it twisted. When we make them sound good, they will start to build all of those feeling relationships at their own pace based on
right.
what they're ready for, kind of like your HOA example earlier.
Yeah.
They'll start to have that extra little cookout with the neighbor across the street when they feel comfortable, but they will have that bond, which is that we accomplish something hard together. That will be because ultimately what everyone needs in order to make friends is they need to have something to connect over. And so I see our job as music teachers, job one, is we make them sound good because then we give them something to connect over if they choose to do that. Thoughts about that
Right.
way of framing it?
I think that's exactly right. I
Yeah.
think that's exactly right. Because what you do is that's the premise behind do your job.
Mm-hmm.
That little thing. Do your job. Just come in here and do your job. That's the premise behind it, because an introvert and an extrovert can get along perfectly on a B flat. Right.
Yeah. Yep.
Like, they can, all of a sudden, none of their personality stuff matters on B flat, you know? And so,
Or their politics don't matter. There's no
none of
there's
it
no
matters.
such there's no such thing as a black B flat and a white B flat, right? You
All
see
of
what
it
I'm saying? Yeah.
is
Yep.
just B flat.
Mm-hmm.
And if you can, and if you focus on, let's get the B flat, and that's the genesis of what we're doing,
Mm-hmm.
is making sure we get that right. Now we can start adding other things on top of it as it's appropriate, or as it organically grows. Because obviously in choral music you can't always just to be flat, just to be flat. That's a privilege that only exists in instrumental music, right? Where it's like, nothing else matters except the notes on the page. You know what I mean? But when you get into choral music, now we're starting talking about text. There may be some other conversations around text that need to be had, but the bottom line is it should all start with B flat, right? It should all start with know your notes, know your rhythms, do the stuff that we know we can do together that doesn't require anything other than you doing your job.
Yeah.
Cut your grass,
Yeah. Yep.
and yeah.
No, that's really good. I want to get I want to get your take on one more angle with this before we wrap this
Mhm.
up, because this has been really, really good, very productive. I appreciate your time. So we live in an era of the ever expanding acronym, right? There is LGBTQIA plus 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 plus, and those have been growing. I'm old enough to remember when it was just LGB.
Hmm.
And the same thing is occurring now with the acronym of DEI, and now people want to add B for belonging, and they want to add A for access, and they want to add all these things. And I
Hmm.
actually think that that's a mistake, and when it comes to the concept that we're talking about. And here's why. And I just want to see what you think about this way of thinking about it. So if we think about the for diversity, well, that's an objective thing. We can measure the diversity in a variety of categories for our groups, right? We can
Hmm.
measure racial diversity, diversity, gender expression. Those are things that are outside. You can take a
Quantifiable.
look at them from the outside and see it. We can measure educational equity type things. We can
Right.
measure whether or not students of different types are getting the things that they need in order to be successful within our educational environments. So they're objective. Even things related to inclusion, the I part of inclusion originally actually came from different types of learners. Actually, like, are we including different types of learning styles and different types of learners, different disabilities, etc. We can measure that. We
Hmm.
can't measure the B. We can't measure it because it's subjective. It's based on all the things we've been talking about. It's based on people's opinions about whether or not they feel certain feelings during the rehearsal. And I think that's
Hmm.
actually where some of this balance problem in our profession has been coming from. It's where we're starting to attach, do people feel like they belong? We're starting to attach that to our sense of self-worth about whether or not we're leading a good classroom or a good rehearsal, good choir, etc. And I think it's causing us to kind of obsess over these things and cause some of these balance problems, and in a lot of ironic ways turning people away who don't feel like, well, I don't want all the feel good stuff. I just want to come and make music like the story you told at the very beginning.
Hmm.
Am I crazy in noticing these connections, or do you see any resonance with that?
Well, okay, so I think I think that the issue with a lot of the, well, first of all, let me back up. Yes, I think the quantifiable DEI are always it's always easier to, I shouldn't say easier, it's more effective because like
Mm-hmm.
you said, it's measurable in that
Yep.
regard. I think the question with the B aspect is it's kind of like what I said. Okay, here's a good example. So I had to talk my way into landing on my thought. So when I was at an HBCU prior to coming here, a PWI, predominantly white institution, and one of the things I said in my interview process was, talk to me about what you all are doing in terms of inclusive environments. Because the reality is, my face on the website is going to enhance your ability to attract students who look like me. Just,
Mm-hmm.
that's the whole point, right, of
Yeah.
having a diverse faculty is people can see themselves in your faculty. So my question was, well, what are you doing when they get here? Because one thing I don't want to do is attract a bunch of Black students who then are in an environment where they have teachers who are just saying crazy stuff to them, and then they're out of here, right? I'm not. I
Mm-hmm.
don't want to bring students in to a unsafe environment, you know, just because we haven't really done that. And so I was very pleased with the conversation around that. Hence why I'm here. But I think that's where the B part kind of comes in, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I think it's the, the belonging part is much more of a conversation about you interrogating your own stuff.
Yeah.
'Cause it
Yeah.
doesn't matter how many books you have on the shelf, right? It doesn't matter how many seminars you have. It doesn't matter how many, if the teacher hasn't interrogated their own stuff, then all of that, it's a wash. So I think the only way to really create belonging is with a with teachers who've interrogated their own biases, who actually work on this stuff internally. Um, you can't quantify that,
Right.
right? Like you can't say, okay, prove to us that you have dealt with your biases. You can't say, because it's it's not quantifiable. And you can't legislate the heart, and you can't legislate, you just can't. So
Yeah.
I think where you're coming from is we're getting into this space of trying to do that, trying to now legislate how people feel about
Hmm.
things. Because I'll tell you the truth, a lot of people who are from historically marginalized communities um, come from the perspective of you get me in the door and I'll show you that I'm amazing,
Yeah.
right? Like, get me in the door and I'll show you that I'm amazing. I'm not really as worried about some of the, like, I know how to avoid and navigate some of this stuff on my own. So, you working so hard to legislate people's feelings, actually, I'm not really asking you for that,
Yeah.
right?
And
I just want to you just make sure your
yeah.
systems are
That,
good.
yeah, that's exactly what I was getting at. And I think even in your example of being at the university where you are and asking those questions about will black students feel welcome if they, I don't want to bring them here if they don't feel like they, even there, I would imagine that there is that buffet aspect that I was talking about before. There could be, and I know because I have many kind of Midwest, the Midwest black person who grows up around a bunch of white people, oftentimes has different perspectives on a variety of things. But
Shocking.
yeah, I know, and I it's almost like diversity is a strength.
Right.
Where I've talked to people, to black people who have that buffet aspect of it too, it's like I don't care if the professor's racist as long as I know how to do math. Like
Right.
I'm just let me come in, let me get my skills, and let me show the world what I can do, and I'm not going to get caught up on all that. And I
Right.
think where we get ourselves into trouble is when I think this is exactly why I wanted to have this conversation with you is because if we're trying to legislate what that student feels, then ultimately that's a reflection of us projecting our values onto that student, and I don't know that that's our job.
True, true, and it's not. And I will say, because I don't want to leave it out there without the other side of it, because I also
Sure.
think what's important, systems systems that are inequitable
Hmm.
um, are not. They're not just they don't exist without the people that create them, right? And
Yeah.
so I think that's where the knowing that people are interrogating and knowing that you're putting people in the position to be better about dealing with their biases is important, because the reality is, while a student may say, I don't care if the teacher is racist,
Hmm.
um, the reality is, if the teacher is racist, they care that you're black,
Sure.
right?
Yeah.
And so I think that becomes an issue. So, and I know that's a kind of an extreme
It is.
example,
Yeah.
because very
Hmm.
few people of, like, very few women probably say, I don't care if somebody is sexist. Very few, people who are gay say, I don't care if somebody's a homophobe. Like, in this day and age, people's actual feelings about things matter, because it ends up turning into legislation and ends up turning into systems.
It's
And
the
so there,
power. Yeah, the power differential is where you get into the issue. And like
yeah,
so when I hear that from people, it's usually with that caveat. So for example, if I hear somebody say that, it usually includes as long as they leave me alone.
right,
Right? As long as so if you're in your example, if it's a professor, if that professor is using that bias to harm the student, well, that's a completely different thing
yeah,
than just the attitude of I'm gonna do my thing, which I think ultimately is a little bit of a tangent from our conversation, but it's related, which is that our choir
yeah,
students, when our
hmm,
choir students come into our environments too, with that diversity, to use that term, that diversity of viewpoints on
hmm,
what they want from our environment.
yeah.
So I think this is really really good. I'm going to give you the last word to kind of tie this up in your head.
Yeah, I think on that point, I think the my perspective on this, I believe, really helps both students and teachers, because the
Hmm.
reality is, you have teachers that are trying to figure out how to navigate this new world where the wrong thing you say or the wrong expression can really cost you a lot more than it did some of our forebearers, right? Like, it
Hmm.
can really cost you if you don't have a firm grasp on all the ways to address different issues. And
Right.
so I think the while you figure that out, and while you are trying to, I believe that everybody should interrogate these things, read the books, read the articles, listen to the podcast, all those things to really try to figure out how to best serve in these capacities. But in the meantime, the best thing you can do, I think, is to simplify and get down to the B flat, get down to cutting the grass, get
Yeah.
down to just focus on that, build a system in your classroom that students are very clear on how they can be successful, how they can engage. And it's not about their feelings, which is kind of crazy to say, like about
I
a choir
know.
class. It's like, it's not, they don't have to feel a certain way about your class. They just have to show up and do their job. And what is their job?
Yep.
It's kind of the old school way of, getting held accountable for what's in your syllabus.
Yeah.
It's like, simplify it. And then I think from that standpoint, you will find yourself building a community where students are choosing their engagement level, and you're kind of, you're not necessarily requiring the deepest engagement from them.
Yeah.
And a lot of times the students will give that to you anyway. But yeah,
Right. Yeah, no, that's really good. Jason, this has been awesome. I appreciate your time, and thank you for sharing your perspectives with us.
absolutely. I appreciate it, man. Thank you.
Thank you, as always, for sticking around to the end of an episode. If you are still listening, that means you're one of the people who are MVPs of the Choralosophy podcast, the people who stick around to the end. Of course, the ways to help are to use the Choralosophy promo code at sightreadingfactory.com, mymusicfolders.com, 3minutetheory.com, EndeavorMusicPublishing.com, GraphitePublishing.com, and of course you can join the Patreon. Link is in the show notes. You can also subscribe at Substack and chip in a few dollars a month there. All of those things are great ways to help, and of course like, share, leave comments, be part of the conversation. That's what this is all about. See you guys next time.